I'm honored to be with you all today, and thank you for joining us. This is our first featured session of our Smart Start Conference 2022. Last week, we had a wonderful 4 days of consolidated, excellent deep dives into topics with wonderful presenters. And now we embark on 3 days, each a Thursday, the subsequent Thursdays in May, from 10:30 to 12, with a featured session with panelists and a moderator. And the first one is launching today. And this is when we'll be focused on developing bipartisan consensus on early childhood care and education. Then on May 19th, we will have a session again, 10:30 to 12 via Zoom, on the power of collective action. And then finally, on May 26th, our last feature session will be on exploring national, state, and local workforce supports for early childhood professionals. It is a gift to have chosen a profession with such universal support. We have bipartisan support for early childhood really across the globe. And it is a wonderful and gratifying venture to be on, and to be on with all of you as we continue to look for ways to not only preserve that, but to strengthen that support. And I'm deeply grateful to our colleagues at another wonderful organization that has roots in North Carolina, but has national focus too, the Hunt Institute, and one of our wonderful partners there, Karen McKnight, who's Deputy Director of Early Childhood and will serve as moderator of the panel discussion. And a special thanks as well to our panelists, 3 terrific legislators from the North Carolina General Assembly. Karen?
Thank you, Amy. I am excited to be here representing the Hunt Institute today, and thank you, of course, for having us. The Hunt Institute was created over 20 years ago by our founder and namesake, 4-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt. We serve as a nonpartisan education policy support to governors, state legislators, and other high-level state elected leaders. We cover the full spectrum of education policy, from early childhood through the workforce. When most North Carolinians recall Governor Hunt's terms in office, the first thing that comes to mind is education governor, and our programming seeks to create future education leaders. Early childhood education was one of Governor's top priorities, even creating Smart Start, the reason we're all here today. The pandemic has made clear the importance of a state's early childhood system to ensure children and families have access to high quality care and education, as well as family supports, such as home visiting, to provide children and families the resources needed to thrive. Over the next about 90 minutes, we'll be discussing this with 3 of the co-chairs of the North Carolina General Assembly's Joint Early Childhood Legislative Caucus. Let me introduce Representative Ashton Clemens, Representative David Willis, and Senator Jay Chaudhry. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. To begin our discussion in true early childhood style, we thought it would be fun to have you each share a fun fact on your district and how you came to be engaged in the early childhood efforts for North Carolina. Representative Clemens, may I start with you?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm State Representative Ashton Clemens. I represent North and Northeast Greensboro in the General Assembly, and I'm so happy to be with all of you today. I came to the early childhood work by being a kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade teacher, and then elementary school principal. And I think I'll talk a little bit about that for a later question, but that's how I came to it, by teaching with our kids and knowing and realizing how important what happened before they get to kindergarten really is. And a fun fact about my district is that I represent the Greensboro Piedmont Triad International Airport, and we just announced a huge, exciting development with Boom Supersonic coming to build the first supersonic airplanes. And so we are really, there's a lot of excitement here in Greensboro about that. So that's in my district.
Thank you, Representative Clemens. Representative Willis, may I ask you the same question? Will you share a fun fact on your district and how you came to be engaged in early childhood?
Well, how I becoming engaged in early childhood is pretty simple. I had children. That really was the trigger for us. And so My boys were 3 and 2 at the time, and finding childcare in South Charlotte, the greater South Charlotte area where we're at, was just impossible. And so we realized there was an opportunity, there was a passion that we had to work with our children and work in the early childhood space. And so we decided to start our own business. And here we are 12 years later, and it's gone really well. And we're fighting the good fight every day that we can to help promote early childhood education across the state. A fun fact about our community here. That's a great question. We're largely the funniest thing. I think that we're a bedroom community of Charlotte, so most people think we're actually in Charlotte, which we try to tell them, no, you're still in Union County, and your kids go to Union County schools, and we're all here. I think the biggest thing, because of where we live in our district, it is really suburban Charlotte, but the number one product in our area is agriculture. And so just a short 15-minute drive from here, and you've got, some really big farms, horse farms, equine, the industry is very big around here. And it's just beautiful to see all the horses and the horse farms and all the families that participate in all of that as well.
Thank you. Senator Chaudhry, same for you. Will you share a fun fact about your district and how you came to be engaged in early childhood efforts in North Carolina?
Yeah. Good morning, Karen and Amy, and thanks for having us on this important panel discussion. So I represent State Senate District 15, which, I'll say 2 fun facts, because part of it is I've been redistricted 4 times in 6 years. So I've only retained, I think, 6 precincts out of 60 some precincts we have in the state Senate. But along those ways, I was trying to think what the overlapping, what's overlapped in those precincts, and one of them has been what's now known as the district shopping center. Used to be formerly known as Cameron Village, and it was the South's first mixed-use retail residential space that was created between Washington, D.C. And Atlanta, and remains the oldest in one of the oldest in the South. And so that's a fun fact for the district that I live in. And my reason for being interested in early childhood education is actually very similar to Representative Willis's, and I'm sure also Representative Clemens, is that we all have children. And I think as a first-time parent, I have 2 children now that are in the Wake County public school systems. I found myself reading a lot of early childhood books and trying to determine how to best be a parent. And then I think one of the things I've come to realize is that I'm very blessed and privileged to have the resources to be able to raise our children with that early childhood support that I feel like a lot of North Carolinians don't have that opportunity. And for other reasons that I know we'll discuss this morning, I actually think, as to Amy's point, there's universal support. And I think I strongly believe that it is the single best investment that we can make as a state government.
Thank you. I'm excited to get into this conversation today. Representative Clemens, we'll go back to you. You've been a kindergarten teacher and a principal, and you are passionate about early childhood. Tell us why it's so important to you and how you engage that passion in others.
Thank you. It's so important to me because when I was a first-year teacher at 21 years old in Durham, I remember choosing kindergarten because I felt like I was going to get them at the beginning of their education career and have this great kindergarten year and start them off on their path to success after having this great year in kindergarten. And you realize quickly how incorrect that feeling was as a kindergarten teacher, and how much what happened before they ever came in our classroom impacted certainly their academic skills, but in so many ways, it was impacting their ability to access the academics that we were giving them. So if a child hadn't yet learned that they have to sit for 10 minutes and attend to what's being given to them, it was going to be really hard to then teach them the letters and letter sounds and numeration and all the things I was trying to teach them as a kindergarten teacher. And so for me, I started as a kindergarten teacher, and then it taught me to look back to what was happening before they came to me. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I was wrong and I want other people to learn from my mistake, because the best way we can improve children's success is by helping them come to kindergarten ready to succeed, and then continuing to strengthen our K-12 system once they're there. And then how do I bring other people along in that passion? I think part of it is finding people like Representative Willis who share that passion, even if you have some different ideological beliefs about different things. But I think finding people who share a passion about this and talking together with those people. And so I think for me, it's just talking about my experience, hearing about Representative Willis and his experience running a child care center. Like, there are all these rich experiences. And so building passion is really, to me, listening and sharing in our stories, and then working together on what the joint opportunities are from those stories.
Thank you, Representative Clemens. I love hearing that kindergarten story from you every time. Representative Willis, you own a child care center. Tell us what you've experienced since the start of the pandemic, how it compares to what you're experiencing now. What strategies are you thinking about as it comes to the workforce? We know we're in an early childhood crisis here when it comes to finding classroom teachers. But what are you thinking about with that and ensuring the children in your program have well-prepared teachers?
So, we have a center that has a licensed capacity of 172 children, and we made the decision very early on in communication with our staff that we were going to remain open throughout COVID. And obviously, we went from a center that was bursting at the seams and had a year-long wait list to a center that was serving 30 families that were deemed essential workers. And so we saw the full tilt of COVID and the shutdowns and how that impacted us, our families, our staff. And so it was it was a real struggle. And I think we're just now maybe going back to the beginning of this school year, more or less gonna, not 100% at capacity, but close to 100% capacity. And the staffing has been a big part of that challenge, obviously. And so it's you had a number of teachers who were close to retirement, and one were scared of COVID and what might happen with that. And I think it just kind of prompted some of those folks to just say, what, it's time just to go ahead and retire and move on to the next stage of of my life. And so it's taken a number of people, experienced people, and most importantly, out of the mix. And I think that certainly had an impact. For us, we've been extremely blessed to have a number of staff that have been with us. Like I said, we're on year 12. We've got several staff members. I was actually just talking to one yesterday afternoon, and who's been with us since day one. And so we've got a number of experienced teachers that are still with us. And so for us, we've shifted to kind of a grow your own model, where we're looking for young teachers or people who are interested in teaching, and helping bring them in and put them through the MNC Teach program, get them signed up with our community college to start taking classwork if they don't have classwork already, and then encouraging them to go through and complete their degree. And we're also pairing them with a senior teacher who's got that experience and can mentor and help them with that. I've got great administration staff as well that have been with me for a long time and have a great background in early childhood. And so they've been terrific with us. But, it's not that way in many places, and I get calls almost on a daily basis. Where can I find staff? Where can I find staff? And so we're sharing what we're doing, but it's it truly is a calling to be a teacher, and especially in the early childhood phase, because a lot of teachers now are going into the K-12 system. I think as we look at to touch on a little bit what Ashton was saying a minute ago, as we think about the importance and the connectivity between K-12 and early childhood, I don't think that's ever been more important than where we're at right now. And, we've got to be able to break down that silo between the two and work more closely together. And helping the workforce piece is going to be a critical stage of that.
Thank you. I love hearing about the coaching pairing. I think that is really important, that a lot of childcare programs don't often offer new teachers or inexperienced teachers. So that's a great strategy. And I think that culture and support that teachers feel is important to retaining them. So thank you. Senator Chaudhry, there's a number of pressing needs facing early childhood education in North Carolina, from family engagement and funding to access to technology. As a legislator, how do you balance these competing priorities?
So I think it's a really, really tough question, because there are multiple pressing needs in the early childhood education space. I will say that part of my interest in early childhood, started both as a parent, but it also started given the fact that I had spent several years working at the Attorney General's office, and there are a number of studies that show early childhood education can also reduce rates of incarceration, reduce rates of violent crime. It means that our citizens are less likely to receive governmental assistance. But I think, to answer your question, Karen, as I think about competing priorities, I feel like so much of the lens that I now view what we need to do, as I'm sure it is with my other legislative colleagues, is to look at it through the pandemic and what the pandemic has done, not only to the early childhood workforce, but just to the economy in general. And I think, to a person, what we hear from our constituents and from small business owners is around the fact that they can't find workers to come back into the workforce. And if we want to try to rebuild our economy, part of that equation is actually making sure that we provide the right childcare for our families. So, today we have 200,000 individuals in North Carolina who are at home because they don't have childcare, but we can't solve that issue of trying to rebuild the economy unless we look at the demand side, which we know already. There's already a huge waiting list for the number of families and individuals that are looking to have childcare. But I think, to Representative Willis's point, there's also a supply problem because of the very low retention rates that we have in the early childhood workforce. And so now, when I think about priorities, I would put a priority on the recruitment and retention of early childhood workforce, because I think that's an important problem for us to solve. And I think it's part of solving. I think it's part of us building back the economy coming out of the pandemic.
Thank you. I see a couple of questions in the Q&A touching on workforce, and for those of you in the audience, we'll get to those later and keep asking those questions. But I do want to ask all of you, we recognize the importance of stakeholder perspectives, especially those of educators and families. How have you been able to use these perspectives to deepen your understanding and shape your approach to these early childhood priorities? Open to all of you. So I don't know who wants to go first, or I can just call on folks.
I'll jump in, because I'm living this on a daily basis. And so I think, for me, one of the things that, and being a freshman as well, you're looking at the outside of Raleigh, and before you get there, and you think, gosh, why isn't somebody doing something? Why isn't this, happening already? And you get to Raleigh and you realize, people use the term drinking from a fire hose quite a bit, but there's so much going on within the state itself from so many different industries and different avenues. Unless you have someone who is really passionate about a specific issue, oftentimes there's just no one to champion it. And so it's not that people don't care, or maybe that they don't know about it. It's just the bandwidth that one individual person has to do all of the work that they want to do just isn't there. And so I think, for me coming in, at least, I'll say on my side, we didn't really have a real early childhood champion on our side. Folks had moved on to different roles or other things, and there was a little bit of a gap there. And so I stepped into what I felt was a gap, and just started trying to help other folks understand the day-to-day challenges of what's happening. and what the needs are, because it's, anything with education and government is a slow moving train. And so, we've got to figure out a way to speed it up a little bit and get it moving, because we are really at a desperate time in terms of staffing and the pipeline for what we have. I mean, the funnel is really kind of inverted right now, and we've got fewer people coming in and more people going out. And how do we turn it back the other way? And so to me, it's about helping educate, folks around the General Assembly and have those conversations. And it's bigger than just early childhood. It's workforce development. It's economic development. I mean, we've got 2 classrooms right now that we could fill in Union County with NC pre-K children. We don't have the teachers to put into that program. And so, we've got, and then you take, okay, so say there's, 18 children per classroom, it's 36 kids in one group. And then how many families does that lead into? And then how many folks maybe aren't going to work or having to find other solutions? And so it's much bigger than early childhood. And I think that's part of the discussion that we need to have and look at it, and how do we solve this? And so it's about bringing the government to the table, about bringing industry to the table, and about bringing education to the table. And how do we have these conversations, and how do we solve this? Because it's going to take all of us working in unison to solve this. It's not just going to be, okay, government, go fix this. We're going to have everybody at the table, including parents, and trying to figure out how we move forward with this. And so I think there's a lot of things that we need to be working on. Workforce development and flipping that funnel around the pipeline is the number one issue to me right now.
Karen, can I just say, I just want to add to this, because I think there are a lot of different stakeholders that are involved. I mean, I think we traditionally look at early childhood providers, families, is part of that stakeholder process. But I think, as Representative Wills talked about, I mean, I think the importance of having business at the table too. But I do want to just also kind of acknowledge the leadership role that Representative Clemens, has played, especially in trying to bring together those stakeholder groups. Because I think, to Representative Willis's point, I think one thing, I've come to realize through the work of the Early Childhood Caucus that Representative Clemens has put together, and I know she'll talk about during this panel discussion, is that you've got to have, you have to have the stakeholders, but you also have to be really organized. And I think this kind of caucus that's been put together, that comes from both chambers, both parties, where we know there's universal appeal to it, but there's a lot of work that has to be done in making sure that you've got to be able to communicate and sort through those differences. And I really think, like, some of the work the caucus has done is unlike anything I've seen in other caucuses in the 6 years that I've been here. So I'm really excited, but I think I've come to recognize that it's going to take time for us to bring about some of the long-term changes needed in this space.
Yeah, and I just piggyback on that as well. I concur. I mean, Ashton has been, a fantastic champion for this, and kind of driving the ship and keeping us on track, because, a lot of times it is herding cats, and she's done a fantastic job of that. So thank you publicly.
Well, that's just wonderful, right? We can just end the panel there, Karen.
And so that leads me to, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and, let's talk a little bit more about the caucus. You, as your peers have said, you've been a driving force behind the creation and the continuation of the Bipartisan Early Childhood Caucus. What made you start that, and how's it working across committees and chambers to build consensus and drive legislation?
Well, thank you. It started in partnership with the Hunt Institute, and actually Representative Craig Horn and Senator Rick Horner were 2 Republicans, and the 3 of us were in New Orleans for a leadership institute on early childhood that the Hunt Institute was pulling together state teams. This was last session. And so we kind of had this discussion of in our early childhood space, there are a lot of hands in the pot. We have K-12 system and DPI, we have DHHS, and then a multitude of statewide and local nonprofits, Smart Start. We have a lot of people. And so we really felt like how do we have a voice that can advocate for prenatal through 8 years old that is not dependent on one leader and it's not dependent on one party, but it really is dependent on advocating for our earliest learners. And so that's really where the idea came from. And then both of those gentlemen left me abandoned by retiring from the General Assembly. But luckily, Representative Willis came and actually, ironically, is replaced Craig Horn, who left. But it just turned out that one advocate was replaced with an advocate who had real life experience, which is priceless. And so, you know, I met with Representative Willis early. I think we talked on the phone, maybe even in December before he was even sworn in, about some of the things we wanted to work on. And then we reached out across chambers, and Senator Chaudhry and Senator Bergen were willing to work on us. And there's a mix of education-minded folks, but also Senator Bergen brings a health perspective, which is very important in this space. And so that's really, and then a lot of the work to me is hearing from legislators about what they agree, what we can agree on, and what are our challenges or barriers, and how do we address some of those things, and bringing people together to have some of the conversations. So Representative Willis and I met with chamber leaders from across the state. It really is diversifying the voices that are advocating. And Karen, I just want to say one thing about the question before, which I got skipped over, which is fine, but I do want to say, I do go to Head Start classrooms. I was in an early Head Start classroom a couple of months ago. Last week, I went to our 3 Guilford Early Childhood Award winners. I went to each of their classrooms and presented a flag to them. So a lot of the work is big picture, bringing people together, but it is also knowing and hearing and seeing what's happening in our classrooms across the state. So I just want people to know that we are doing that too. David is doing it literally every day because that's what he does for his work, but I make it a priority to go into classrooms, especially now that we are able to do that more not post-COVID, but where we are right now, we're able to visit. And so I think that's important for folks to know as well.
I wasn't trying to skip over you, Representative Clemens, with that. I know you're really great at hearing from the stakeholders in your community, and you tell a great story about visiting an early Head Start classroom recently. Would you mind taking a moment and sharing that story, and maybe how stories can really support those trying to get movement in this field?
Yeah, and the story was important to me because it talks about the family, but it also talks about to me, the economic aspect of what is happening in the early child care space. So I was in an early Head Start classroom in Guilford County, and a mom had I'm going to say about 1-year-old, and she was coming to to her classroom. She looked very frazzled, as I look when I'm taking my 3 children to school as well. You just have this look when it has not been a good morning. And she looked really, really frazzled. And the Head Start teacher walked over to her and gave the mom a hug. And the mom works at a local fast food restaurant. She had her uniform on. She gave the mom a hug and she said, "Don't worry, I got this. Your baby's fine. Have a good day." And took the baby, held the baby, 1-year-old, so baby to me still, held the baby, they went and sat and read a story. And the mom, like, her shoulders literally dropped and she kind of took a breath. And so that mom is going to work at a totally different productivity level than she would have if she was still in this frantic mode, worried about her child, worried about all the things. And that baby's brain was literally better able to learn because that teacher was able to take the tension down and made that baby's brain able to learn better. So, and that's what you guys in Head Starts and early childhood classrooms are doing every day for our workers, for our families, and for our future workers and our children. So yes, I love visiting because you get to see, for me, it's like all the theory, you get to see in practice how that comes together in our communities across our state.
Thank you. I really do. As a former Head Start employee and teacher, I really do appreciate hearing that and hearing the great thing you saw there. So I want to go back and talk a little bit more about like the system as a whole. Research and practice has shown that our mixed delivery system, which comprises a variety of early care and education programs, provides the largest return for communities. How do you balance the needs of local organizations that make up this mixed delivery system, such as public schools and private childcare? And what factors do you consider? That's a big question.
I don't know. I'll jump in. Jay, were you gonna say something? Or
Go ahead first.
I think it is a big question, and I think if all of us had a crystal ball and a magic wand to kind of figure that out and just wave it and make it all work, it would be great. But I think we've seen a lot of changes, and I'll use Charlotte for example, just because that's the area that I'm in. Going back to 2008 or so, we had two large banking systems here headquartered in Charlotte. There were a multitude of early childhood centers located in uptown Charlotte between the church programs and the bank sponsored programs. And then, fast forward a few years, the recession hits, there's some consolidation in the banking industry. Bank of America closes its center. Wachovia, our First Union, Wachovia get bought out. And two of the centers that they had, one got shut down completely. One, I think, moved private. And then all of a sudden, almost half your capacity in uptown Charlotte just went away in seemingly the blink of an eye. And really hasn't come back because you're in a space that is landlocked with construction and everything else. And in places like that, where you've got, these high density business areas, unless somebody is very forward thinking in a development project, you're not going to have the space to use to create that. And so, I think as we think through how we move forward, we've got to have everybody at the table. It's got to be the developers. It's got to be the local governments. It's got to be the planning boards. It's got to be, the childcare industry, itself, and the folks representing that, and the families, and our economic development folks. Everybody's got to come together and say, look, this is a critical need for what we have. We have to be more thoughtful when we're planning or we're doing these things, especially in areas that are harder and harder to find real estate, and real estate skyrocketing as we've seen across the state, in our more urban areas. In our rural areas, it's easier to find land and opportunity to do that. But then you've got, do you have enough kids to fill a program and the staff to work and that kind of thing? And so, different challenges from where we're at. But I think we've got to have everybody at the table. And I think part of what we've tried to do, and, the work with Ashton and Jay is to try to, bring all of those folks to the table. Because as Ashton mentioned earlier, there's so many people that have a hand in this. The more we can bring everybody to the table and have those common discussions and look for common ways out of some of these problems that we've created, we'll be more successful if we're able to do that. But I think the need and the sense from our side on how quickly that needs to happen is growing by the day, because I think we already feel very far behind, and just trying to foster those conversations. But we've got to have everybody at the table. We've got to start pushing forward how we plan for this. Because to your point, I think there's tremendous outcome and return on investment, for these types of programs. But we've got to get everybody else to realize and understand that as well, and what role they play in that. And that, even so, I use Charlotte, for the developers coming in and looking at a new project in uptown Charlotte, they may not be able to make as much money off of a space that they carve out of a big, mixed retail project for a preschool, but the return on that and the success to the overall project in the area is tremendous. And so I think we've got to get people thinking about it in different ways and purposefully thinking about childcare, because if you don't, and you don't go into that up front, it's easy just to to cut that out, and we'll squeeze a few more apartments in, or we'll squeeze another retail space in over here and that. And so it's going to take some forethought and some advanced planning to be able to do that. And we've got to have leadership from across the state engaged in that.
Thank you. Senator Chaudhry, did you have anything to add?
No, I mean, not really a whole lot. I mean, look, I think the mixed delivery system in North Carolina provides parents with choice. But as I mentioned, I mean, I still think the challenge is both on the demand and supply side, particularly around compensation and shortages. What Representative Willis was talking about in just kind of reimagining and rethinking kind of the role of businesses and childcare. Actually, just earlier this morning, I was with the president of a very large technology company here in the Triangle, and she mentioned to me that the new headquarters they're opening up, they're putting an early child care center in the headquarters. And so, I mean, I feel like businesses that understand the importance of retention with their employees and increased productivity for their employees, also understand it's the importance for them to have childcare centers and making sure that there's childcare provided for those employees and their companies too.
Jay, we need that person to come speak.
I know. We should get her to come speak.
Yeah, we really should. Karen, the only other thing I wanted to mention about mixed delivery system is that families need to be able to have their children where they feel comfortable. And so for me, my children went to my church's daycare. And we still go to church there on Sundays, and we knew the people, and that building was comfortable for me. And that was a really wonderful, safe space for my family. I know lots of people prefer in-home situations because it feels like grandma is keeping their kids and that's what's comfortable to them. And some people like a very, professional, structured environment of our, more traditional center-based care. And I think it's good that we have a system that families can choose what feels comfortable to them. And we just need to continue to work together so that one of those is not predisposed to succeed at the expense of another. I think that that's critical. And that we have, no matter what, so that we have all these options, and that the quality of what children are experiencing in all those options gets children as prepared as possible. So I think that's our challenge at the state level, if we zoom out, is how do we have options so families can feel comfortable in different ways? And how do we have expectations that children in all of those options are getting what they need and families are getting what they need? And that one isn't strengthened at the expense of another. So to me, those are like the strengths of it and the things we have to be mindful of in this system we're in.
Well, and I would just add on to that too. I think, as we think about K-12 and the space that they have right now, I mean, most of our school districts across the state are struggling just to keep up with the influx of new children coming into the districts as they grow. And so, having another, say, birth through 4 model attached to that, which often isn't the case, it's just pre-K. But, I think there needs to be a better balance. And I think, we're already asking our K-12 schools to do so much as it is with K-12, adding pre-K into that is going to be, an even bigger challenge. And so I think working with the private side of this and kind of keeping, while we're trying to break down silos from one perspective, I think keeping that a little bit separate on the educational and the space perspective makes, a ton of sense. And so, I think as we move forward, that private side of that equation is going to be critical.
Thank you. And I think that is something that North Carolina is working through, like the coordination and collaboration at the local level to ensure that the services and supports are available to families across the continuum from birth to kindergarten. It can be challenging, but something that's needed in order to continue the mixed delivery system. We've talked a little bit about the caucus already. Representative Willis, can you talk us through some of the major priorities? And you may have already mentioned some of these, but that the caucus has moving forward?
So we've covered quite a bit of it, I think, already. One was just trying to bring folks to the table and have some of these high level conversations with with key stakeholders from different groups across the state, industry, education, government, and so forth, and all of the different folks with the parents and the child care centers, themselves. And then I've started having conversations with folks working in the the DCD space, and what are they seeing, and what perspective can they give us? Because I think a lot of times we forget that lens, and so I try to talk with them quite a bit as well. Part of what we've got to do initially is kind of, I think, pare down the 1,000 needs that we have into 2 or 3 really actionable pieces that we can really go push for as we go into short session and then prepare for long session going forward. I think obviously the pipeline to me is the biggest piece, but that goes hand in hand with wages and the scale on that. And so how do we make it enticing enough for someone coming in from the outside, whether it's an 18-year-old just graduating high school, or a young mother who may have an interest in coming into early childhood, and also then maybe be able to take advantage of a quality program for her own child. And so I think there's a number of different ways we can approach the pipeline piece, but I think we have to have it all on the table and focus on those key drivers of what's going to do that. And it comes back to what's going to entice them and support them in that. And it comes back to wages and benefits, and how do we support them in that perspective. And then it gets more complicated when you're talking about the public-private partnerships and how we do that. And so I think there's a number of pieces that we need to crack there. But to me, it's really the pipeline, the wages, and the benefits piece of how we support them when they're there.
Thank you. Senator Chaudhry, what do you think is the most important early childhood policy priority that the legislators should consider in the coming session? And maybe help folks on the call today think through the difference in what you would push forward in a short session versus a long session, if that's an easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess customarily, we're only going to make adjustments to the budget. So we can talk about money, although I'm going to defer to Representative Willis and what his opinion may be on budgetary issues. But I mean, I think Governor Cooper yesterday released his state budget. I think one of the issues that he highlighted is actually around childcare, childcare teacher pay, which I think is important. I think plays into this idea of retention and recruitment. I mean, I think we've generally seen now that the average pay for a early childhood care worker is somewhere between $10 to $12. They're making $25,000 a year. Many of these early childhood educators are 7 times more likely to be in poverty than a kindergarten teacher, and 40% of them are on some form of public assistance. And we've seen case studies both in Virginia and in Louisiana, as well as the work that's been done by Smart Start, that shows that if we increase the wages, we can decrease the turnover. And I feel like there's a couple of pieces of good news. I mean, certainly Governor Cooper in his budget yesterday has advocated for an additional $26 million for wages to look at supplementing those salaries. But the other, I think, piece of good news is the recommendation that we've seen from the Hunt-Lee commission that also focuses on advocating for increasing those wages. And that was a bipartisan effort that a lot of good work was done, including a number of good recommendations in the early childhood workspace. I will say that I know that a number of us on this call, I mean, as legislators, are going to be exploring the workforce development issue for early childhood education. And my sense is we'll probably spend most of the rest of the year kind of focused on that. But in the short term, I'm trying to stay optimistic that we can get that money in the budget that Governor Cooper has recommended.
Would anyone like to add about their policy priority or add anything to the senator's remarks? Anything you're thinking about?
No, I mean, I'll tag along with that piece with the early childhood or the wages program. I think that was something, that was something I was advocating for in the long session on the budget, going ahead and expanding that to all 100 counties. So I'm glad to see the governor took my lead on that and kept that in his proposal. But jokes aside, I think it is important that we expand wages across all 100 counties and get that in there, because keeping the most experienced teachers that we have is key to turning the tide on, the future of the workforce piece. Because like I said, I mean, how we use our experienced teachers is to help train and mentor the next generation. And so we need them. We need to be able to keep and retain them there. And so I think, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have that conversation and, be able to make that tweak going forward, to be able to keep that. And then that, I mean, it's not the silver bullet, so to speak, but it gets us, a big step in the right direction. And I think that, there's more that needs to come after that.
I just wanted to add that Guilford County is a wonderful place to represent if you're focused on early childhood, because we have a lot of really cool work happening right now with Ready for School, Ready for Life. And we funded in the first year of the budget, some of 2 different projects that I just want to mention briefly. And hopefully I'm working with Representative Hardister and Faircloth, who are also Guilford County representatives, on hopefully funding a little bit more this session. Ready for School, Ready for Life is a comprehensive, huge project in our county to what does it take to have every kid going to kindergarten ready for school and ready for life. And it's involving our healthcare system, our early childhood spaces, our doctors. I mean, it's a huge project. But at the state level, the things that we are working on is building an integrated data system in Guilford County. And that is something Representative Willis and I have talked about. It's really important that we have data talking to each other, so that if the nurse from the health department goes to visit the mom who's just had a baby and needs help with their heating bill, that we know whether that mom gets help with heating, because that impacts that family's ability to support their newborn, as an example. So Guilford County, we helped fund at the state level some of that building of the integrated data system, but I'm hoping I'll continue to be advocating for a little bit more, because I really think that's a model for what helps us know how to effectively use resources to see what is working and where are our holes. And the other is, we have Guilford County through Ready for School, Ready for Life has a pilot project to have 3 centers implement the nationally accepted model work standards for early child care learning spaces. And they're going to have a research partnership to put these model work standards for our early child care workers in place, and then to measure how does that impact what happens with kids, what happens with parents, what happens with educators. And so I think that's exciting, because it will be able to show us, like, why does it matter that there's a predictable work schedule, or these other model work standards that were nationally adopted, and why does it matter for what's happening for kids, families, employers, and parents and educators. And so I think the workforce is the biggest statewide issue, which David and Jay talked about, but I just wanted to mention one of the local things that we'll be working on in short session, because there's a lot of really exciting things happening in Guilford County.
Thank you. So looking forward to some of what we've been talking about, like connecting early childhood to the broader goals of the state are key. How do you see early childhood relating to the overall success of North Carolina and its economy?
I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's the most important thing. So I think our immediate ability to meet the economic needs of our growing state depends on people being able to go to work and being able to upscale their skill set to get better jobs. So we heard from community college presidents who have actually asked us to join them, because the number one barrier, they said, to people coming back to community colleges to get their certificates, to get better jobs, is childcare. Like, it is so interwoven into the current workforce. There's no way to separate it. And it is building our future workforce. It is the best investment we can make it is like 8 times the amount of return on the investment if we did focus on 0 through 5 compared with actual job trainings later on. So like for our immediate economic needs, it's critical. And for the workers of 18 to 20 years from now, it's critical. So to me, it's like the most important thing we can do for building our economy, though I'm very biased and I am upfront in saying that.
I don't think there's anything biased about it. I don't know. I guess I've yet to meet someone who's against early childhood education. Maybe I guess there are folks out there, but I think to your question, Karen, just to underscore what Representative Clemens said, I mean, there was a study that just came out from Wells Fargo this month that just talked about I think there's almost 500,000 families that still can't find childcare, and the fact that we can't get the economy back to working. I mean, this was my earlier comment, without providing childcare for folks. I mean, today, women with children under the age of 6 have a employment rate of 66% compared to their male counterpart, which is a 94%. And so it's a huge gap that we see between working women and men. And when we think about the labor shortage that we have, part of our solution clearly is to making sure that we build out a stable and affordable early childhood education system.
Yeah, well, and I think it's, I don't think it's the most critical thing in terms of, the growth for North Carolina, but it's certainly a top 5 key component of that, because we can't continue to attract businesses and industry into North Carolina and the workforce that comes along with that without having quality childcare available to them. And I think, to Jay's point, I mean, we'll never close the gap, and I don't think you really want to 100% on the working mother piece, because some mothers are just going to choose to stay home because they feel like that's the best option for them, and they should have that option. What we've looked at is one, partnering with South Piedmont Community College here locally to provide either a full-scale childcare model or kind of a drop-in model where students can have a safe place for their children while they're going to class or taking coursework or working on a certificate or a job skills training, whatever it may be. And so I think there's definitely some interesting work happening there. And I certainly think that's something that could be easily replicated across all 58 of our programs within the community college system across the state, which would be tremendous. And then I think it's also, again, as these industries are coming into North Carolina, helping have as a part of that conversation with them, look, we need you engaged in early childhood because this benefits you as well. You need a workforce that's going to come in, and as Ashton mentioned earlier, you need a workforce that's going to come in and mentally and physically ready and prepared to work. They need to have some place that they can trust to have the best interest of their child during that time. And we've got to work across the board on this and make sure that we've got everybody at the table to solve it. And where we've got, and it was great news from Jay this morning that one of the industries is opening their own in-house, and we need to spread that message and share that, because where we can get those employers to re-engage in the early childhood space and understand the impact that it does have on employee retention and satisfaction and everything across the board. And go back to my time at Bank of America, we never had a child at the center there at that point, but I know colleagues that did, and it was a tremendous impact on their view of the bank and their desire to stay and remain with the bank. And so it has a tremendous impact across the board. And I think it's one of those things that maybe after the recession back in 08, 09, some companies kind of took their eye off of that. And so we've got to re-engage them to start thinking in those ways again, and then help us with this, across the board. So not just, for their employees, but for everyone.
Thank you. I think benefits to employees from businesses is something a lot of states are considering and moving to. So appreciate that consideration here and look forward to seeing how we help solve that issue. So I'm going to ask one more question before we kind of move on to the audience questions, and please continue to ask those in our Q&A. But so we know there are 75 local Smart Start partnerships serving all 100 counties in North Carolina. What strategies do you suggest as these organizations look to grow their partnerships and work with their local elected officials?
You want me to start, Karen?
That'd be great, Representative Clemens.
I think it's very important that everyone, no matter what, I mean, we're talking early childhood right now, but I think in general, when I speak to groups of students, I tell them, like, I drive past your elementary school and I go to the grocery store here because, like, your elected officials are just people in your community. And I think it's really important that everyone is inviting, building relationships. Now, some elected officials have different capacities, and some have other full-time jobs. I mean, you know, so different capacities, but continuing to reach out and invite elected officials to everything that you can within the early childhood space is really important. And I think I would say that that would be, like, I've been invited and gone to classrooms, but also just one-on-one communication between Smart Start leaders and your local elected officials are really important. And it can be 15 minutes, but then Jay and David will tell you, like, when we are in session, things are like hitting you in the face over and over and over and over and over again in an hour. And so you need to have the relationship built before session starts, so that if an early childhood, a Smart Start, or whatever thing comes up, I can say, help me know how your perspective on this thing. But the relationship has to be developed, and it should be easy for your legislator to find you as your Smart Start, and if it's leader. And if it's not, like, that's work to be done if you want to have your voice heard as decisions are made. And the last point I'll make is, I really hope, like, we are really reaching out to the business community. As Jay said, I was on the Hunt-Lee Commission. The Chamber of Commerce was a big partner in that. And so how we're building statewide business support, but that needs to be localized as well. Smart Start leaders working with chambers of commerce, local business leaders to talk about early childhood needs to be happening at the local level as well. And Smart Start is very well positioned to be facilitating those conversations.
Yeah, and I just add on to that, you know, if, you know, for those folks that are, you know, representing Smart Start on or other organizations, I mean, reach out to your local officials or even those, you know, kind of on the outskirts of your area, not just in, you know, so if you're in Mecklenburg County, for example, don't just reach out to your MEC folks, reach out to the, you know, the surrounding counties and the folks as part of the greater area around there as well. And the more people you can touch and invite and include in those conversations and have them come and visit, you know, the better I think they're going to understand what's happening, what the needs are. And then, you know, as everything, you know, that human touch, that human interaction, if they see it and they feel it and they, you know, they're there, obviously it's going to have a longer, much more lasting impact on them. So when they go back into session, they're thinking about it and they, you know, they can connect that human piece of it back to somebody rather than just, you know, this abstract policy idea that we're discussing.
I mean, it's also in, you know, each of our legislative interests to make sure that you're contacting your legislators too, because I mean, I think what we're talking about is trying to push for bipartisan solutions, and part of finding those solutions is it's got to be a bottom-up approach where you're educating that member. I mean, as Representative Clemens talked about, I mean, the opportunity to invite them to come visit the facility or highlighting those issues are really important. I mean, I think the other thing which was interesting, you know, listening to Representative Clemens talk about what they're doing in Guilford County, I also think there's opportunities to kind of design your own program at a local level where there's also the opportunity to partner with your legislatures. I mean, I think oftentimes we try to view early childhood education as a one-size-fits-all solution, but I know that we've had separate conversations here in Wake County about the things that we can do here.
Thank you all. I think, you know, hearing a couple of different things. One, it's a story. One, it's using your data to tell that story, not just the quantitative, but the qualitative as well. And Senator Chaudhry, like I know Wake County is partnered with the Chamber of Commerce to expand NC pre-K, for example, or make a 3-school, including 3-year-olds in the preschool program. And I know Charlotte is doing a lot of innovative things, expanding subsidy and providing other supports to the early childhood field. So I think it is just, again, building those relationships like Representative Clements said, and telling those stories to try and come up with those solutions. So thank you all. We've had some great questions in the chat. Representative Willis, start with you. So your partnering a new teacher with a more experienced teacher has resonated. Are you providing any additional compensation or incentive for the senior teachers that are mentoring your newer teachers?
Not particularly for that. I mean, it's a part of their, it's a part of their job as we view it. And it's different in, I think, the role that we play in early childhood, because every classroom, at least for our center and for most centers, has requirement to have multiple teachers in the classroom. And so part of it is helping train and coach their co-teacher. And I think there are a number of benefits for that to happen, obviously, because it takes pressure off of them as well. And then the sooner that they can get up to speed in lesson planning and preparing and delivering lessons and doing some of those things, it takes the pressure off of the senior teacher to kind of carry that load so much. But it comes back to kind of their overall compensation. So we don't carve out something specifically for that, but it's certainly part of the consideration we could look at overall compensation.
Thank you. So there are a lot of our questions are kind of around this workforce issue that everyone's experiencing at the local level. Have one from Tony. I love the grow your own approach. We're trying to work with our high schools to provide incentives for high school students to get work experience. Any ideas on how to make this effort successful will be greatly appreciated. I think apprenticeships and shoring those up across the state could be one strategy. Are there others?
Well, one thing, I'm sorry. So one conversation we had, and I mentioned earlier, we just visited with South Piedmont Community Colleges a few weeks ago, and we've got a couple of high schools throughout Union County that have an early childhood program within the high school. And so looking at what we can do to help, support those programs and drive interest in those programs, I think, to that conversation we were having earlier, though, it comes back to, compensation. What does that look like? Can you get a decent paying job if it's something that you are interested in? And so how do we help those students graduate and then come right into a kind of on the job training type program, and then, support them through, the community college process and make sure that they don't have to pay for, their own schooling to go through that process, and then help them get into the wages program, more quickly. I think obviously then, you take someone who may be starting out at, 12 or, so dollars an hour. And then, you can show them a path quickly to get to, 20 or so. And, we need to continue to grow that on the top end, because, obviously that's going to continue to be a struggle, as we see inflation continue to grow and other things. I mean, we've got to continue to push these, these scales higher so they can, they can meet the demands and to have an attractive opportunity for them as a career.
And Karen, Susanna had in the chat a related question, which is like, for people that are teaching already, how do we make it easier for them to upscale themselves with getting degrees? And so I think Representative Willis has indicated a couple of times a partnership with our community colleges. Our community college system has started a lot of really innovative things, both for certification and like helping it be way more accessible, flexible, less costly to get a 4-year degree, with partnerships with some of our statewide institutions as well. So I'm glad that both people raise that. I do think there's some innovative things happening, and we need to learn from those and continue to scale those up. And so I think our community college system being the most valid or vital partner in helping people easily and affordably be able to upscale themselves is really important and critical.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we've got great programs out there, and you know, we as a center have always operated and utilized the TEACH program, and we've had a number of teachers go through over the years and go beyond just the associate's degree, go into you know, a bachelor's degree or even a master's degree. And so we've been very supportive of that. But I think the way the program has evolved right now, and some of the federal programs that have passed dollars along to our community college system, there's money out there for scholarships, for other things. And so if you're not talking with your local community college, I would start there and go have those conversations, see what's available, because you might be really surprised about what opportunities there are for you, and being able to do that and to upskill and to move in if you wanted to move on to, say, administration or another role within the childcare industry, you know, or you know, or certainly encouraging other folks to come into you know, to the teaching profession. So
thank you. Yeah, I think one of the ones I've recently read about is in Mecklenburg County and CPCC with a scholarship called Strive that offers funding for their tuition, but other needs as well, such as books, technology, and I think sometimes even rent if needed. And I think some of the flexibilities that Susanna was mentioning. And I think another community college put their early childhood program online during the pandemic to encourage that flexibility, because so many of the teachers were working long hours, providing services for the essential workers. And so I think those type of innovations could really continue supporting folks to make it easier to continue moving through the field. Senator Chaudhry, there is another question in the Q&A. What are your thoughts on creating a pathway for undocumented individuals to work in the childcare setting to help with scarcity of workers, of employees? Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I certainly think that's an option. You know, to be completely transparent and honest with you, I worry about kind of where we are on issues around immigration here in the General Assembly, but certainly we've seen, you know, interest in other industries to look at potential for bringing undocumented employees on board, and it's actually a really interesting idea and something that I'd be willing to take a look into.
I do know, I used to work with East Coast Migrant Head Start Project and serving children of migrant farm workers across the state. And I think one of the tenets of Head Start is to support families in that role similarly, but I think it is a difficult proposition to think through. So thank you for trying to address that. We have another question again about the workforce. You know, somebody that worked in their program went to Target for higher pay, having a new infant that doesn't have a slot in childcare. How do we begin to offer assistance for younger teachers to get their degree so they can earn a livable wage? And I think we've talked a lot about this a lot. Are there any additional ideas or things that we're thinking through?
one of the things that, you know, we've been talking about a little bit recently was, what can we do for our teachers who are mothers? And so for, you know, this example specifically, you know, we deal with families quite often who are in the foster care system and you know, may have a child kind of dropped off to them on a moment's notice and have to kind of figure out how they're going to manage that. And so, you know, we've got a good relationship with a number of those families and try to do what we can to make sure that we can help accommodate when they need on short notice. But, you know, for working moms, especially those in the early childhood space, you know, I think that we need to do what we can to help them as well. And you know, one of the things would be, you know, can we offer them the same assistance regardless of their family income? You know, can we just, you know, can we make sure that they go right to the front of the line on the subsidy side and make sure that they themselves don't have to worry about paying for childcare? Because there's a balance for any early childhood provider to be able to cover the cost of, those children. And at one point we had 10 staff children in our center, and that was extremely difficult, to be completely honest. And so, how do we help them and then not put the burden on the center itself, who may be struggling as well? And so, one of the ways would be to include them in the subsidy program and have them kind of qualify automatically, like we do with the foster or some other programs. And so I think that would be a tremendous benefit. And then that goes back to the income piece. And while you're not necessarily raising their wages specifically for that, you're saving them an incredible amount of money off of that, which goes to their overall compensation conversation. And so I think there are a number of ways that we can do that. One, helping with the educational opportunities to help them advance and move up, and then helping them with their own childcare needs. And then obviously, you're going to have the opportunity to help them stay in the field, and then they're going to have a quality experience for their child as well. And so to me, that's one of the areas that I would like to see us move on rather quickly.
Representative Clemens, there is another question for you specifically. What have you found to be the most impactful or effective strategy or strategies when advocating for early childhood and needs and their concerns?
I would say I'm not sure if the question is about like, how do I know how to advocate or what I'm doing to advocate? So I'll answer both of those. So one, like, I think to feel like I am appropriately advocating is being connected to people that are in the field. And so for me, that looks like lots of different things, going to the classrooms, just knowing people that are running centers, or there is a wonderful 3-year-old teacher that's in my district who's very organized with her local, like with her neighborhood. And so I talk to her pretty regularly. So I think like making sure that I stay connected to the people on the ground is how I feel like I'm trying to advocate for the things that are most important. And then with the actual advocacy, it's two things. One is it is listening unjudgmentally to whoever you're talking to, and believing that the person you're talking to has positive intentions. And so I try to do that in every conversation I have, no matter what the topic or who I'm talking to. And then second is I always try to think about what are and this is kind of an approach beyond early childhood, but what is a shared value that you and I share that we can start from? And as has been said, it's not hard to start from a value of caring for our youngest children or caring for our economic growth. Like those are values. And so when you start to get down rabbit holes or like anytime, and I actually learned this as a principal, I will say, but anytime the people you're talking to start to like go against each other, it's like, what's our shared value that we can't give up on? And let's come back to that shared value. And so to me, that's how I try to have conversations on every issue, but particularly this issue. And as has been said, it's a shared value that 99% of people are going to agree with. So then using that shared value to say, okay, well, could we do this? And well, could we do this? You know, what are the things we can do based on that shared value that we have? I don't know, Representative Willis, since you and I have had many conversations and sit on different sides of the aisles, how would you what would you say from your perspective?
No, I think that's right. And I think, going in with an open mind and having a conversation and finding that common ground, because I know, there are conversations that you and I have had privately and that we agree 100% on, and then there's conversations we've had privately where we disagree. And so it's but the ability to still, work together and do so in a friendly way, I think, is important. And so it's, just because someone doesn't have your specific, maybe sense of urgency around something doesn't mean they don't care, and maybe they don't want to help you with that. And so I think just, going in and having those conversations with as many people and doing so in a thoughtful way makes a huge difference. And we get asked this question a lot when we go around and meet with groups is, how do we engage with our legislators? How do we do that? And the first thing I always say is go in respectfully, because we get just inundated with emails that start with "you work for me" or "I demand that you do this," and you're starting off on the wrong foot at that point, honestly, if you want to have an open dialogue and get somebody to come over to your way of thinking. And so, go in and just start having those conversations, and actually pointed out, find some common ground, find some areas where, you have a personal connection, and then, those walls start to come down a little bit, and you can start to have more, personal, I think, sharing of what you believe and what you want to work in and why it's important to you. And I think that goes a long way to, to building those relationships and productive long-term relationships. So, yeah.
And one last thing to add. I mean, I think when you hear folks talk about advocacy and folks when they're advocating for the legislators, I mean, folks are a lot less likely to remember statistics or how effective your program may be compared to just telling a story. And I think for each of us, especially if you're a parent, I think our children give us a lot of great stories to tell. Some can be really funny. Often humor can be a great way to connect with other folks, because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for better investments for our children, which really are our greatest investments we have in our state.
Thank you all. And I think I'm going to start wrapping up, but I do want to put a plug in for an activity that the Hunt Institute is working on. It's called Local Data Informed Strategic Planning. It's funded through DHHS and DCDEE and the Preschool Development Grant. And it really is doing a lot of what we've talked about here, and what Stuart put in the chat around the chamber and the Child Care Task Force. Stuart is in one of our counties. So right now we're working with 15 counties to do training around data and using their data to create local strategic plans. And many of the counties have local elected leaders on their teams. So just for those of you in Smart Start, we're going to be putting out cohort 3 to add more teams. Would love to have you all join us. And I think this could actually support a lot of what we've talked about today, and bridging some of the needs that our local communities have and working with their local leaders by using their data and creating strategic plans and being able to communicate about them. So that said, put a plug in for some of the work Hunt is doing with the state. I want to thank all of our panelists for your time today, and all of you that have attended for this morning. We really appreciate learning from you and all the time that you've spent with us. Thank you all very much, and we're excited about watching the work moving forward. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're so honored to have had you on with us, for your bipartisan support, Karen, for your ongoing partnership, and all your colleagues at the Hunt Institute. Thank you. I think I could just want to be, as I end, add all of the chats, all of you in the chat box and participants. Wow, I just could eat up, our comms person's telling me, Amy, get tweeting, get going. And I'm terrible on social media. I couldn't even figure out what to say. But one person, Lori, you said, it is so exciting, so happy to hear passion. It's so genuine from the three of you for early childhood. And we are so grateful. I speak on behalf of the field, and I come to North Carolina, as many know, with more of a national perspective. And this is why North Carolina leads on it, because we have policymakers like you all doing that, and partners and thought leaders like the Hunt Institute, of course. And then I also want to just herald again the Smart Start local partnerships, because they are doing the work on the ground of supporting the folks who are in direct service to our youngest and most precious North Carolinians day in and day out, the childcare teachers, the family support providers, home visitors, on and on. So many thanks to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.